it's not just the absence. We're grieving every future plan, every essentially hypotheticals, because none of it had even happened. And then, I've learned in life too, there's not even a guarantee the things we planned were gonna happen, but I find myself longing for them. And still do. I'm coming up 3 years, and I think most people that meet me would say, you were actually handling it very well.
I'm with Justin Haesma, my good friend from my hometown of Grand Rapids, and you have been all over the world. You have a hell of a life lived already, in successes and losses, and I've learned a ton from you, most notably in the areas of how you've persevered through really hard times. You're not a gay dad like me of kids, but you're a dog dad, and in many ways, like a father, you've lived some things that you have something to offer to me just by listening to what you've learned and gone through. That builds up things in me, so I know what to do with my kids or my life. And like, in a way, we almost father each other.
Something we didn't catch at the time, and only in recent years, and more of us have started talking about it, is that idea of the kind of almost being the daddy mindset, but really kind of filling those roles through sharing our experiences in life. And, more and more friends of mine were all acknowledging, because our generation, like my age group, we didn't really have that. We rarely talk about how many men died, from late 70s all the way up into the early 90s, before treatment for HIV/AIDS really kind of took its hold and was working. So we kind of talked about that, the guys that would be our daddies, our role models, our examples, they weren't there. And then, many, especially in West Michigan, in areas where there is this stronghold of theology, of politics, especially conservative lines, even those that were there tend to be hidden. It's not, we weren't raised under this out and loud and proud. It was really still just something you kept, under the wire. And just seeing that change, in West Michigan in particular, I've had the blessing. I had 1 year where I was actually able to get out and volunteer, which is just, when it comes to the events, especially my hometown, I love to volunteer at my event, and then I'll travel to other cities. But even seeing that, the idea that Grand Rapids that I grew up in, and the wonderful people at Grand Rapids Pride Center and those that do it, this started, our Pride Festival there, was just Calder Plaza. You're familiar with downtown in Calder, and it's kind of that center square off Ottawa and Grand Rapids. And that was just it. And then it grew and grew. And I was actually, forget which city I was in, so I missed Grand Rapids Pride last summer. But just the idea, they spent 2 days, 50,000 something people. I think that just in West Michigan, in Grand Rapids, in this town where, it shows that, I think people that, either gravitate to the major cities or were just always there, you kind of forget there are still these parts of the country where the change is coming, but it's slow, because Grand Rapids is the second biggest city in Michigan. But then you get to the smaller towns, and through especially travel groups, like now I'm working with Vakaya Vacations. One of my favorite things about that job, and most recently I worked with them in their resort week in Puerto Vallarta. You just catch people and you get their stories and what they're doing. I met one guy from Missouri, and when I was rural Missouri, and he took the charge and, got his community on board and created this just insanely beautiful mural, but it's like the single, like essentially lone figure gay man in this very conservative area, finding ways to just bring that in, and find ways that appeal to his community and things that bring them together. And it's really inspiring. I love that. You get the stories of what people have been through and where we're all trying to affect some, positive momentum.
Speaking of that, we talked a lot this weekend while I've been with you about your social media.
Yeah.
And this is just one place to start with who you are, but your Instagram is very popular. You found a lot of your own empowerment as a gay man and voice there for the last 5-6 years?
Not even that long. So when did I really? So I guess with me in social media, for the longest time it was just Facebook, and it was back in 2016, and just where I was in life in general, professionally, just where I was socially, And it was kind of right around the election, of course, like the Pulse nightclub, all these things, just major things in 2016, which you look at the headlines now, it's like, geez, that was a tame compared to what we see on the daily. But I got rid of all social media. Like it was just, even then, just the way strange, it challenged my core beliefs. And I found myself engaging in that. And for me, it was like, I just need to pause all this. And so, let go of social media for a while, reflexively dove into reading and all kinds of things, just anything to kind of fill that time. And then I think it was a few years later, friends started talking about Instagram. I'm like, because I was telling them this is why I don't want, I don't want to do anything. Like, oh, you should try Instagram. Here's why. Even my ex-wife at one point brought it up. Oh yeah, I love it because, it's just a different format, right? Yeah. So one day I'm finally like, okay, let's try this. No idea. It was just, let's figure, what is this? You start seeing different posts and following different pages and just kind of through that, it's just one of those things that at different times it fulfilled different needs. And then kind of flash forward to, I think that was 2020-ish when I really at least started playing with it, even though I didn't know what I was doing with it or even, like, how does this work? And you already start seeing that kind of mystifying, why people respond to some things but not others. And, just always, it's kind of a fun window into what gets people engaged.
Yeah.
And that's just my role in business, went from military, Marine Corps to hospitality. So always very customer front focused. And I went corporate work and kind of brought, into property management, the skill set. And of course, ultimately took that into my design career. But all of it comes from that, being able to kind of just pay attention to people and catch those minute details and things and try to get some sense of the patterns behind what people are doing.
Tell me what Instagram has done for you personally, for your life and your betterment for you. And then tell me a little more about what you do it for today to help people. Because we talked about this. It's not just about...
So it was funny. The real dive for me and to Instagram specifically, and even something, it sounds off the cuff, but even like the thirsty pics and hump days. And, it was this roundabout exercise kind of in healing. It was, and I'll admit, it's leaning into that validation that comes from others. But at the same time, I'd scroll by and eventually my own picture, I don't, everybody's feeds are different. I would see my own go by. And then all these other different body types, I make a point of, not following one type of account or person. It was a very broad range, and you start to appreciate not just that long and short, appreciating other people. And then I'd kind of see myself go by. And again, my body composition's changed all through this time. I've gone more emphasis on fitness, but Instagram was kind of that first window in kind of seeing, aesthetically and just the appreciation I have for all bodies. But then for my own practice, it kind of came about. There's some other areas too where more out of just interest, can I pull this off? Which is very much my mindset, especially in business and stuff. It was taking that same risk mindset, risking curiosity. I don't even know if I'm gonna do with this, but let's try. And it was kind of the ideology of taking things that we all identify as toxic and, the behaviors that come with it. And just, can I take something toxic and make it something useful? As I mentioned to you the other night, since the 7th grade, I've only been under 200 pounds once in my life. And that was because of a stomach surgery. So at my youngest age, I just had this negative opinion of my appearance. And then, of course, my mom's modeling. I still remember we went she was going to do some kind of runway thing. And she brought us boys because they were looking for youth. And the woman looks at my mom. She goes, I can use these 2 points at my brother's. I can't use him. And it was the way she said it. Wow. And then a few months later, I'd gone out for football. I love football. I got cut from the game. The coach said it right in front of me and my dad. We can't let him play. If he falls on one of the other boys, he'll hurt him. This is football. But I was a big boy. And then it took me years later. My dad told me to go wait in the car. I think it was about 10, 20 years later. I realized he must have read him the damn riot act because that's my dad. But so then flash forward now, I'm getting asked to do these shoots and I'm seeing this momentum in social media. And it really was just this very unplanned, but it started changing how I viewed even my body hair. For years and years, I kept cropped, about the time I was coming into the world. That was the Abercrombie years and the smooth, dolphin smooth, circuit boys. And, even in relationships, if I dated somebody, they didn't like the hair. So I just constantly chemical burns from Nair, you name it. And it was when I met my late husband, Gary, he's like, I don't want you to trim your body. And nobody had ever said, it just never occurred to me that people would be into the hair. And then of course you flash forward to now I have a whole page, furry daddy, and it's the hair. If anything, people get mad when I do groom a little, and it's just,
I would get mad.
It's mind blowing. It's been this roundabout, it's taken a few things full circle. And ultimately it's just finding ways to connect with people, because we don't all connect to the same things. We don't the same way. Not everything catches our attention. And especially in social media, with quite literally everything you can think of, you can find somewhere.
A lot of my audience are men like me that came out late in life, or have even yet to, and they're watching this stuff and they're seeing men like you, guys like you, have incredible accomplishment in an area that to them seems either unattainable or so far off in the distance that if they had that, all their answers would be solved. And I guess I want to ask you, you have access to what I would consider a social life in a world of gays that do find success in fitness, have, aesthetic looks that are, I would say gorgeous. And
I
think for gays,
it's truly sculpting in its own right.
Right. For gays, there is a social currency and a value to being what I would consider traditionally hot. Mm-hmm. A lot of us make the mistake of thinking that someone like you has a dream life.
Yep.
And just tell us more about what you struggle with, because yes, you have accomplishments and you've come a long way with your body, but that doesn't mean everything in life is going perfectly for you.
Oh no, if anything, and I was, my motivation to fitness ultimately wasn't even about the aesthetics. I just wanted to feel better. Again, that 2021, this is, really diving in is very new in my life.
Yeah.
And ultimately for me, it was, stresses at home, at this point, we're kind of post the arrival of COVID and everything, and just the anger and just all of it. My diet was awful. I'm having the physical, things that come with that, and just in general, just bleh.
Yeah.
And just one day I just kind of had when you get sick and tired of being sick and tired. And I remember, I think I told you a story. I yelled at a guy in a drive-through, and that story basically ended. He was going to shoot me in the face, and didn't, thank God. And it was hard, because obviously grabbing a gun when somebody goes off on you is not a healthy reaction, even if you're in Florida. At the same time, I felt I owned my part in that. I blew up, unprovoked, blew up at this guy because I misread it. I was having a bad day and stressed out, not taking care. And ironically, it was in a fast food restaurant drive-through, no less. And I was just done. I remember leaving. I pulled out of the drive and I just sat in the park. I think it was in front of a Publix, and I just bawled. I was just horrified that had happened. Like that moment, it's time to change something. And so I go to drive home, and on my way, it was, I think it was called Mid-Cape Fitness. Screw it. I pulled in, immediately went in, registered, even stayed for a minute, walked on a treadmill for 30 minutes. And from that day forward, I was going early on in the morning, just started basically cardio on the treadmill, trying to build up, side-eye to the weight room, aka intimidating, and I find that even people say the same, how much intimidation people walk in with, and it can drive a lot of people away.
Yeah.
The advice I give there, do it for you. If you're there for you, it doesn't matter,
What were the things that worked the most for you that you did for yourself that caused the most change to get you to the body that you love to see in the mirror?
For me, the first diet, that was the first, even before I really started lifting with weights, diet. But I had done enough homework to realize you can't just stop eating sugar. And I've tried that in my life. And, I can equate it. I was a longtime smoker. If I just went cold turkey, good chance I was going to not only pick up again, but go even harder. And this has been true in other areas. And food is probably, because it is the most accessible in huge variety. And so I would find, if I just went cold turkey on sugar, I'd make it a little bit, but maybe 5, 6, that craving hits. And once I started, and so it was kind of, basically detoxing myself was the first step. I started replacing the snacks that we kept in the house. Little bit of the usual, suspects, the cookies and stuff, but bringing in things, really taking time at the store to flip that label. How much added sugar? How much that, really getting, and I have that knowledge just through school and everything. I've taken nutrition classes. I know how to calculate, all that. But really, really looking at it and basically just shifting the balance. And finally I got to a point where nothing, very rarely does anything with added sugar come into my house. Now I can still have it, but then the agreement is, okay, but I have to go get it. There's always a gas station, convenience store. You can go get it, but now it gives me a stopgap. Okay, yeah, I can go get it. Do I really want it? And sometimes, yeah. And I can grab Juno. It's fun to gets us out of the house in the summer. Same thing with ice cream. Don't keep ice cream in the house because I will eat the whole half gallon. If that spoon hits and it hits, it's over. I will eat till I'm sick. I cannot stop. Even now, despite everything I have in fitness, once I turn that corner, it's it's a floodgate. Yeah. But, so it kind of makes it back to but I can go get it. And even better chance, if I call friends or, and it's just shifting behaviors, basically.
Yeah.
But for me, it started with diet because to me, that is actually the hardest one, especially, we've talked about my experiences and just traveling the world. And I've never been anywhere that you see anything even close to what grocery stores look like here. And just the amount of crap in them, honestly, I never really looked at it before. And I love ranch dressing. I just never really considered the impact,
Yeah.
Yeah. And the volume. And again, if I'm, once in a while, I will go out to eat with friends. And yeah, I'm going to indulge. I'm not, a purist by any means. But, I recognize my goals are completely hinged, not only on my diet, but then through this too, and this is over, even reading I'd done before, the relation to our diet and our mental health. There's a lot out there, really coming to the surface that shows, they speak to, like the gut brain link. And there's a lot of compelling things out there, at least something to consider. You're always going to have somebody saying yes. You're always going to have somebody no, and they're going to argue. My advice, as long as it's something, physically, try it because we're all going to have different results. I do well with low sugar. I've noticed I do like for my carbs. I fare better on things like rice, quinoa, grain versus potatoes. And, maybe some of that is, family lineage and just there's a lot of factors, out there. So it's playing with it. See first what works energy wise, food wise. Do I feel sated, but still kind of meeting those calories? And it's just the little behaviors, really keeping an eye on snacks, keeping an eye on my mental health and mood because, with comfort food and start chowing, and that's why I tell people, it kind of loses I stopped calling it comfort food. I call it, because it makes me super uncomfortable if I lean into it hard. Mm-hmm. But if I was looking for a hug the same way, I need to be comforted. I need a hug. Okay, if I'm grabbing for that hug and just like bitten, now that's not, a comfort thing. There's something else going. Let's look at what's driving it. And just that breakdown. And once I kind of got the sugar out, and at least I really, somewhere I have pictures, but when I say lean down, I looked better at 42-ish years than I did when I was in the Marine Corps.
Yeah.
Solely by diet, just diet. And I'd up just even walking, not even necessarily running, but cardio, hiking, just getting those steps in.
What would you say to people that fixate too much on the end goal? What would you have to say for the people that just white knuckle it?
I think this gets to something you and I were we were talking about this the other day. Just a book I love, just because it's good food for thought, it's Chopra's 7 Laws of Spiritual Success. Now, in that book, and this was more me, especially in my 30s, when I really went hard on, I had some things I wanted to prove to myself, especially professionally, and did. But it speaks to the idea of that moving goal line. And so I think it's keeping that in mind that, it's a constant process. There is no, I'm going to get there and be healthy and I can just stop. It really is a lifestyle change. But now add that up. If I look at when I started, roughly, we'll say age of 41, if I live an average lifetime, I should at least make it to about my 80s, 40 years of, 5 days a week, you got to give yourself some grace. Yeah. We all slip. And even in my workout plans, I found, Like I'll go, outside of some health problems I've had December, January this month, because despite being fit, health issues happen.
Yeah.
But I kind of go by the line, our condition going in is going to predict, has a big determination in the outcome, ultimately, how well I manage illness, how quickly I recover. So that's a motivator.
I don't think I would have ever accomplished what I have for myself if I didn't get to the root of how it made me feel inside for myself first, and then even loving the process of getting there. I love the simplicity of getting to the gym every day. Mm-hmm. I miss that very thing when it's not there, regardless of how my body looks that day.
It's a practice you hear of all the time. It's especially in social media, and there's so presence, staying in today. And I think that's where I often, whether it was perfect, you can send your eyes to the goal line so far down the field, you're missing what can be done here today and the fact that it did get done. And I don't know, I think there's so many factors in all of us, and we all respond differently, but I see that a lot, especially here in the United States, probably more than anywhere else I've been in the world, is that instant gratification factor, that I want it and I want it now. And many people, a lot of things are attainable at that level, like click a button, it's here in 2 days. We're so used to instant gratification that the idea of a sustained process, of a sustainable way of going about that process. You always hear that crash diets often not only doomed to fail, but may often, when you rebound, kind of like me, you're going to chow it, twice as hard. And again, it's because a lot of those come from the aesthetic thinking. We always talk about, the word intention is one of my, love that word, I hate that word, because it makes me really stop and think, where our attention goes, our energy will flow. So if my intention, which I think can work, if the intentions are purely aesthetic, for me initially, it's a jump. But for me mentally, that's not sustainable, because I'm never going to feel like I'm hitting that goal, no matter how I look.
Yep.
Now other people may be given all this feedback, but I'm going to look in the mirror and just pick the shit out of myself by default, lifelong habits. And like you said, that's where I've learned, focus on because I physically feel better.
Yeah.
More energy, sleeping better. I no longer have apnea. I think it was I think that was also about 2 years in that, from going from a doctor saying you are diabetes coming. And with that in my family, we also kidney failures, all these things, and all my lab work. It wasn't just the aesthetics. It was my labs were all pointing to, I'm on target for what, so many, just my relatives on both sides of the family have, suffered through. So like that, to just focus on, feel better, focus on diet, and really kind of lean into the things that are out there and find what works for me. Again, we're all different. There's no one map that's going to get us all there.
Yeah.
We all dropped in at different places in life. Same thing with fitness. You start where you start. You've got to find the tools that support what works for one person may not work as well for another. So it's be curious, I guess. Try things.
And guys don't need to look like you to be healthy, do they?
No, I think that is one of the I'm one of those, sure, because I think, we see a fit person, assume they're healthy.
Right.
And then you see their damn lab work, and I've had that happen, but in the same time, I know people that by the medical standard would be classified as obese, morbidly obese. And they have dancers. There's one woman I follow. She's an ice skater. She is doing things I cannot even physically do. So you can't base it on aesthetics. And I'm ultimately a show me the data person. What do the labs show? And I've known several, there's been influencers. These guys are just ripped, jacked, dying of heart attacks.
Yeah.
Because whatever reason, obviously we know what causes, things like heart attack, stroke, it's our blood, our arteries and stuff. So that's where you can't necessarily gauge it. Like even me, most people would gauge, I'm very healthy. I'm not. I have chronic, since I was the age of 12, I have chronic digestive issues.
Yeah.
That is a major challenge for me in my fitness. Just these past few weeks, kind of realizing a lot of what happened is because I was on my New Year swing, I'm getting ready to build, cranked up my protein, and this time my body was like, no. It got to the point where, pancreatitis started kicking in, and I had to, dial back there. And then the strain on my kidneys showed back up. And, Again, it's finding things that work, but also being patient, because I think we all can mentally struggle. Once you get into your gym, or when you literally have to stop going.
Yeah.
Like, I have got to let my body rest, as much as I don't like listening to the doctor. I know it's better and I will fight it.
Yeah.
But it just is what it is, And that's, so I think it's understanding that too. Like, ultimately look at the labs and just look at the behaviors. There was a time I could not sleep without the apnea, the machine, what do you call it? CPAP.
Yeah.
It's been, 5-6 years. And that was just by diet.
Wow.
I hadn't even really leaned into fitness. So there's a lot of things. And then again, flash forward to current times, to have my doctor say, whatever you're doing, keep doing it.
Yeah.
This last month was an anomaly, but it's going to happen.
Yep.
But it feels good to see, these kidney results that have been a thing since my 20s coming up in labs, to see that showing healthy. To see, just this, I just did lab work. We just went over it last week. You could tell my body'd been fighting, but overall, everything's in range for the first time. Again, I was a United States Marine, and then all this time since, in my 40s is the first time in my life, I've got, everything is really where it should kind of ideally be. And you feel it.
Yeah. And
then, of course, aesthetically, that shows out in all, different ways. And just in my overall stress, how I manage stress, how I engage with the world.
Yeah.
It really kind of comes back to that. And
I want to ask one more question on the fitness topic, because this, I think, is a really good place to land this. A lot of guys who are watching this are probably just getting started with their own fitness journey.
Good for them. It's a good choice.
I'm so aware of the man I was 5-6 years ago, how much I didn't know yet about what worked for me, like you had mentioned.
Mm-hmm.
I hadn't dialed my diet in yet, but boy, did I love the attractive guys I was attracted to, that I wanted to be like. So what would you say to someone who doesn't know where to start today, is overwhelmed with how much they could think about doing? What's the biggest advice you'd give to someone who is just wanting it but doesn't know where to get started today?
And this is actually true for fitness. I actually use the same one: mental and emotional, professional goals. Think about the intention. Why do you want to? But the key to pay for there, are you doing this because you hate your body and you hate the way you look and hate, throwing hate at your ass? Or it's because I love myself and I owe myself a healthy life. I want to engage with the world. I want to be able to travel as long as I can before finally putting in roots and no more nomad life. Because I love myself. We often hear that line, talk to yourself like someone you love. Now think about it. Now, me personally, because I know, and we talked about this, people see the pictures. They do not realize, friends will tell you. Strangers have said this to me. I hold myself to a level of personal standard that I don't even try to hold anybody else to, but I will rake my ass for it. And I realize it's because I was always talking to myself critical, and from a point, I hate this about me and I hate this. The advice I would get, take some time to really appreciate the fact that, one, you made it this far, whether you think you're healthy, whatever, you're still here. And learn to love, do it from a place of love for yourself, for your body. You always, even in spirituality, listen to your body, learn to love and honor your body. Which is tricky, because then again, even in social media, we're given a lot of, I don't look that, blah, 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 and perception and stereotypes. We lean into hate so quickly. And that can change. Even that, doing it from a place of love versus I hate this and I want to change it, can even change my intentions, like how intensely I go at it. How obsessively, psychotically driven am I to this? Yeah. So intention, start with that. Why do I want to do this? Because, you could get jacked and ripped. But if you're solely doing it because you want to go to a party and have other hotties hit on you, good chance, my story, I can say this, I've experienced, I know others, you're probably going to end up disappointed.
Yep.
And then what does that do? Because keep in mind, it's not just, there's so many things to attract us to another person. The energy, there's so much more than the aesthetics.
Yeah.
So you go and you're feeling your oats, but you don't get the attention. Now why am I not as good as this other muscle guy?
Yeah.
And it turns back into that self-cycle of second, guessing and self-hating and self-criticism.
Yep. And then just that paralyzing cynicism sinks in.
Yeah.
Of what's the point?
The ultimate feeling, I'm not enough and I'm never going to be enough,
Yeah.
which is bullshit,
Yeah.
but we all do it to ourselves.
Yeah.
So start there. I think do it fit for yourself. And the rest, I did fitness for me, and that weirdly, and it's because the way the universe works, that's where some of the opportunities I have through social media even came in. They weren't my intention. It's not even anything I reach out or seek.
Yeah.
Basically I look at it as just focusing on things, focusing on loving myself. And then if one day I'm feeling, this is where we've talked about this, but if I'm feeling my oats, I'll post a picture. But there's also days, I absolutely do it for the validation grab, because you would never know it to look at the picture I posted,
Yep.
but I needed that boost.
Sure. I want to move on to something else about you that I think has a lot of value to people that are going through loss. They've lost their husband, they've lost their boyfriend, they've lost, even if it's just a breakup of a relationship, but something has occurred where major life changes has happened that's devastating, that they didn't want. You, several years ago, lost your husband of how many years?
We met, we were 11 years when he passed.
Yeah.
And ran our business. I mean, we were truly 24/7 for almost that entire period.
Yeah.
And it was just.
I would just love to hear what you would have to say to those of us that have also gone through loss and grief, and what maybe some of the biggest things you learned about yourself and how you navigated through some of your darkest days these last few years.
Just the strangeness of it. So just the fact that we lost Gary, because it wasn't just me that lost him. I was there, one of his whole family lost him, his mom. I told you one of the most painful memories, it's still there. I'll never not hear her cry when she realized he had gone. And it was inevitable. We knew there was no way out for him. And just the fact that we were able to be there was such a blessing, because I know people that have experienced loss and it was very abrupt and there was no warning and no chance to, and on both ends, I kind of have a good reason to make sure you're saying, I love you, not going to sleep on anger if you can, or be, taking care of things when you have that opportunity there. It was funny, I think back, and it was just the weird circumstances of, because there was an age difference between us, and I remember in the years previous to Gary's own passing, I don't know how many friends, acquaintances that were very similar relationship dynamics to us and very similar professional dynamics. And one of the partners would pass, and you always say that, I can't imagine. I just can't imagine. And then it ends up in your living room and there's no more imagining. It was the wildest experience. And then, too, because through this too, Gary and I, we just hit this hard point. It was right about 10 years together. We ended up separate. We decided maybe we needed to separate to work on our individual selves. And even one time played with the idea of divorce and keep it. We're going through all this, and then the cancer shows up. And you talk about tests like no other, because there were so many strange synchronicities in that, so we're trying to navigate and this new aggressor in the field, and just, it was a mess. And then, he and I get through all that, and you think, oh my heart, I'm like, oh my God, we're actually going to make it. And then the cancer came back. And when I say it came back, it was like it came back like a bomb in his body. There was we knew there was nothing that could be done even then. And it was wild. Grief is pain. I say grief is a powerful teacher, but pain is, because it's just, pain is an inevitable part of life. And even in grieving, sooner or later, our partners in life are going to die. Or, we're going to experience this. That's why, I don't say it to sound cryptic, but people, when, like me, you say, I can't imagine. And I now say, you don't have to imagine, because someday you are going to know. Make the time you've got count. There's so many tools out there to deal with grief. I think and you see that, and right now it's interesting, because we do live in a time where I see a lot of people judging other people's grief. I can think of some very high profile instances, and, at the outset, and I think to people that maybe have experienced grief, but we processed it differently, or you see, but I mean, you see that people lean to certain things and it may appear that they're not grieving, but aren't they? You know, because it can show up in a lot of different ways. The ways I would have coped with that previous to, even again, fitness was a big one, but also spiritual work, a hell of a lot of, trauma work. And it was just in wild timing that those things had just kind of happened in my life before. And even for him, as he's reconciling, I am 57 years old. The life that we had been planning for blew the fuck up. And all that work towards a goal that just never happened. But even in his case, that was the same tools helped him find peace with the fact that, his time was coming to an end. And his peace helped us in some level, because you're not going to avoid it's unavoidable. It's crushing, especially when, I think no matter the age, but especially when you start getting to younger and younger. Like Gary, I was 43 at the time Gary passed. He was 57. I've been part of some other widower groups. One person, 26 years old. They first loves, had been together since high school. And you think you've got that life. And that's kind of something you learn in grief. The moment itself, the initial loss, that's a ton of pain. But I've found over time, and I see this in just society at large right now, it's not just the absence. We're grieving every future plan, every essentially hypotheticals, because none of it had even happened. And then, I've learned in life too, there's not even a guarantee the things we planned were going to happen, but I find myself longing for them. And still do. I'm coming up 3 years, and I think most people that meet me would say, you were actually handling it very well. But somewhat, I'll go and tell you the things you're not going to see on my Instagram feed, at least not often.
So you were 43 when you lost Gary. And in my brain, I think, boy, if I get married someday and find my husband, which I hope happens.
I do too.
To me, that's something where that's the end all. The work is done. The journey's over. The story's done because we have it settled and it's going to be there forever. You're an example of how that's not necessarily true, and life can throw us such a devastating curveball that you would almost go, well, I got to start all over again. But for you, the story hasn't ended there.
I think for me, the biggest change is the viewpoint perspective which I look at it.
Yeah.
Because obviously I got an extreme example of, well, apparently it wasn't forever.
Yeah.
And all these plans and things that they went with him essentially. Well, the plans and stuff I had with him went with him. And it's easy to think, well, that's the end of it. And the truth is we're speaking in terms of someone passing.
Yeah.
I could easily draw the lines to somebody who had just gone through a divorce or even just a breakup, even if it never got to the marriage. You're not just grieving the loss of a relationship. It's all the ideas and everything future down the road.
Yeah.
Right? And especially to divorce. And even in Gary and I's troubles, that we had previous to all this, and things that happened through, our relationship and our marriage is so much time went to the future. We were missing the present. And I think that for me now, and now that I am in a relationship again, which that still just blows my mind. It blows other people's minds. Especially given some of the things I was saying like, hell no. I had planned, I'm going to focus on my family relationships. I am going to focus on my social relationships. I don't need I don't need another, relationship. And truthfully, I don't need it. And I mean that. Because when I look at the intention for so many, just in past, not even necessarily Gary or other relationships, but just the idea in general, there was always this idea we need somebody to complete us, to round us out. And it was just, one day I just kind of had this, what areas do I feel like I'm lacking? Again, that not enough thinking coming up. And that was a big change for me. And just what I even would look for in a relationship. Looking at what do I feel like I'm lacking in, and why do I feel like I'm not giving these, one, to myself, two, is this something I actually need, or is this much like faith and other fitness in my life, somebody from the outside telling me, oh, this is what it is. Well, what do I feel like? What is coming from inside me? And not what do I think, but what do I feel? Two very different things here, right there. Yeah. And, so that's like you said, when it comes to that, I encourage, and then I see people too, we can, and I've done this in my life, can rush into a relationship. I'm in love with the idea of being in love, right? And not really looking at, is this person the right fit for me? Like, we're so much, again, it's tricky because human beings, we are still animals. And especially, we're a herd species, no less, or somewhere between pack and herd, depends on your viewpoint. But there is this partnership aspect that is so part of us. And I think you and I talked about it yesterday, like Stephen Covey's books. Years, oh my God, 20-something years ago, read them, went right over. Only recently did that idea of an interdependent person come in where, now I don't look at my relationship. It's not a completion. It's an enhancement. Now I have somebody and it's just really changed, the dynamic.
Yeah.
And so when somebody, whether it's grieving or, like I said, we were kind of talking about this earlier, people, I can't imagine losing my partner. Yeah, I don't mean it I hope someday you do get to experience it because, I love this line, grief comes from love that's lost its home.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? That's one of them. It basically speaks to feeling that that's a big ass cannonball when you think you're finally going to get there. And then as I look to relationships where I'm at now at 45, coming up 46 years old, I don't look at relationships. I don't look at any of my relationships in that way. My family, like my parents, I've been blessed. We've definitely had our moments and even years between parents or siblings. At some point, one of us is not talking to each other. We've learned to just give it time. And usually things will, some level heal on their own. I look at relationships the same way, but it all comes back to the stay in today. I'm very careful, or more mindful, I suppose, would be the better way of saying, planning all these futures and white picket fences, and we're going to do this and this and this. I've learned to take it in smaller bites. And the bigger change there too is I still focus, my number one relationship, because it's the one I neglected my whole life, is with myself. And that's why I kind of joke now, I'm dating somebody, so are we in a throuple then? Because it's me, myself, and then you? But it is true. It's easy to lose ourselves in our relationships.
Yep.
And
you're not
that's necessarily I don't want to say it's necessarily a good thing or a bad thing. It's just something to watch in the end result.
Yeah.
Because, again, it works so different for all of us, and we all have different goals, aspirations, and, for me, I focus on self because ultimately I'm the engine of this life. I know I'm going to be here as long as I'm here. And life has given me some really harsh lessons, and that partner may or may not be, but I will be. And that actually feels, because the way I care for myself does impact my romantic relationships now.
Sure.
Hell, it impacts my not necessarily romantic, but there was definitely some relations there. And just that viewpoint of nothing's guaranteed, nothing is certain. And it just kind of changed how I view relationships in general. And it took the pressure off. And then, of course, once I stopped looking, he danced right in at, the IML victory party, and here we are. Wasn't even looking for it, and it's just kind of funny how that can happen. And I know, even Gary did not expect Gary when I met him.
Yep.
And then it scared the shit out of me when I met him, because I realized, I'm like, oh no, there's something here. And I was just coming out of the darkest period of my life. The end of my relationship with Jay and all of it. And even at that time, I'm like, I'm not dating. Even it was funny, I still remember Jay calling me out that so much for not dating, because I think it was like, I was really quiet because I met Gary about a month after, right?
Yeah.
And then the same holds true today. It's funny. I guess that's the beauty of the relationship now. I love having it, but do I need it?
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? And that actually makes me appreciate the relationship more, because now it is something to work towards and work into, and take all these lessons, from what I learned, and ultimately knowing, who knows, it is possible. Is it guaranteed? Absolutely not.
Yep. I am inspired by you and just look up to you and grateful to know you. and my life is better because you're in it.
Thank you for doing this. And again, thank you for what you're doing. I think there's a lot to be said for the word vulnerability, for bringing these difficult topics, whatever they may be, whether it's grief, divorce, trying to find ourselves in this world and where the hell we fit in. I think it's so wonderful that, it's wonderful to have the pretty pictures and aesthetics, but it does help to have that human aspect that, it take none of this. Just people see me, they're seeing 45 years of the road here, and specific to social media, just the last few years of it.
Yeah.
So I think it's so good to have stories out there. And, at least, hey, nothing comes easy, but does that make it not worth going after? No. Gym ain't easy, but the results are nice. Mental emotional work, not easy, but it's nice. So I definitely appreciate the people that are putting in the efforts.
I love you. Thank you, baby.
I love you, baby.
Mwah.